Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. You have PBO Advisory Group and Sustainability Net speaking about the benefits and approach for adopting ESG. And before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items for those of you who are new to our webinars. Number one, we do have a chat box on your screen. So if you have questions that come up, we want this to be interactive. Please feel free to pop questions into the chat box. Number two, this webinar will be available and recorded on our websites, and we'll provide links to that so that you don't have to take copious notes. You'll be able to have access to the PowerPoint and the webinar. And if you have any specific, really detailed questions you'd like to delve deeper in with our panelists, their contact information is also available, and they're willing and able to speak to you about that. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful presenters. And first, before I present the presenters, I do want to talk about PBO and Sustainability Next. We have formed a partnership. PBO is really interested in providing ESG services to our clients and in the Western region, and so we partnered with Sustainability Next. And so Sustainability Next, a little bit about them. They were founded in 2013 by Ann Tart, and it's a boutique consultancy agency where they work with a wide range of businesses, from Fortune 500 companies to craft breweries, to really work with them on their corporate sustainability programs and to communicate, report, and develop those programs. And this allows them to benchmark against their industry peers, measure their impact, and engage whatever stakeholders are important to their clients. Sustainability Next has helped boost companies' performance in a variety of sectors, including transportation, telecommunications, life sciences, manufacturing, and technology, and includes brands such as Southwest Airlines, International Paper, Millicom, American Financial Group, Illumina, Hunter Industries, Carl Strauss Brewing, and Grand Pacific Resorts, and Rainier Advanced Materials. So we are really excited about our PBO Advisory's partnership with Sustainability Next, and look forward to working with some of you on your ESG program. And so with that, I would like to introduce Ann Tart, who is the founder of Sustainability Next, and she's the principal consultant there as well. She's a seasoned leader and has 20 years of experience in corporate sustainability and responsibility and ESG strategy and communications, with really strong topical expertise in environmental and social justice issues, which of course right now are hot topics for all of us. And I also want to introduce our own Randy Barnes, who is the PBO Advisory Services Director Lead. And Randy has over 30 years of experience in finance, accounting, and compliance experience. And he's in charge of making sure that the business advisory services and the risk management is supported with all of our clients. He's an expert in SOX compliance and leads companies through implementation and monitoring and performing risk assessments and evaluating internal control environments and assisting with remediations of deficiencies. And so without further ado, we are going to take a little poll to understand a little bit about where you all are in your ESG program. And so I'm going to give you a minute to answer the question, what is the status of your environmental, social, and governance programs? You can click one of those boxes or little bubbles, and then we'll have the results in about a minute. I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay, we're closing the poll, and we're going to see what the results are. This one's new to us, you guys. So of the attendees, we have 50% who do not currently have an environmental, social, and governance program, and 50% who are interested in learning more. So what that tells us is that, we've got some opportunity to develop some ESG programs that are important to you and your stakeholders. So we're really excited about that because that allows us to, to provide guidance on that topic. And so, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Randy, who's going to give you a little bit more information about ESG.
Well, thank you, Fran, and hello, everyone. Thank you for participating in our webinar. What we're talking about today, in the broadest sense, is risk management. It's identifying, assessing, and controlling threats or risk that may prevent an organization from achieving its strategic goals. And today, organizations face an evolving landscape of environmental, social, and governance-related risks that can impact their profitability, success, and survival. So especially based on the poll, it looks like it would be good to start with some key terms, just to make sure everybody that we introduce some of these terms to people are going to hear. So to start with, CSR, corporate social responsibility. This is a term commonly used to define the responsibility of organizations for non-financial performance. ISO 26000, which is a guidance on social responsibility, the Institute of Internal Auditors, and the Open Compliance and Ethics Group, or also called the OCEG. They all give separate but similar definitions of CSR. Areas that are commonly associated with CSR include governance, human rights, labor practices, the environment, fair operating practices, consumer issues, and community involvement and development. The next one, ESG, which is what we're talking about today, stands for environmental social governance, and criteria that may be used to measure performance on non-financial factors. And we'll look at this more in a moment. And ESG is sometimes referred to as sustainability or non-financial risk. But sustainability in its stricter sense is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So we can go to the next slide. So what are ESG-related risks? They are environmental, social, and governance-related risks, or it could be opportunities that might impact an organization. So this graphic is one definition of ESG categories. For environmental factors, note the inclusion of factors such as climate change, clean energy, and use of natural resources. And for social factors, diversity, human rights, and working conditions. These are all hot topics we've heard a lot about this year. And then governance, that's internal oversight. It establishes the manner decisions are made and executed. And note the inclusion of board diversity and compensation policies. These are also hot topics. So we go on the next slide. So why does ESG matter? It matters because stakeholders care, and stakeholders are those affected by the organization's activities. Their interests intersect with those of the organization. For example, customers. Customers want to buy from companies aligned with their personal values, and they may actively avoid buying from companies that conflict with their values. They may be willing to pay more for products and services from companies aligned with their values. Millennials and younger employees are especially focused on ESG issues. As a group, if they have their choice, they seek to work for companies aligned with their values and actively avoid companies that conflict with their values. Organizations concerned with ESG may be able to enhance employee motivation by instilling a sense of purpose in their employees. And suppliers, they want to be dealt with fairly and ethically, and it's in their interest to engage in ESG and help their customers become ESG compliant. Communities, they want organizations to respect the people in their communities and protect their environment with sustainable practices. And shareholders are now looking for investments to make a positive impact on society, not just achieve a good return. Global sustainable investments topped 30 trillion in 2019. And women, millennials, and high net worth investors, they're the ones taking the lead. And there's evidence that ESG companies perform better, which creates value in the company. Investors are looking beyond valuation or growth aspects of the company. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that companies that track ESG may do better than others. And there's an organization called the WBCSD. This is short for World Business Council for Sustainable Development. It's a global organization and it's CEO-led. The WBCSD has over 200 leading businesses in its membership. And its goal is to make sustainable practicing businesses more successful. Its members represent a combined revenue of more than $8.5 trillion, and they have 19 million employees. You'll recognize these companies. Among them are Apple, Canon, Chevron, Michelin, DuPont, Google, KPMG, Microsoft, PepsiCo, Verizon, UPS, and Walmart. You'll recognize most of them. So what this graph is showing is the WBCSD membership of companies beat the S&P 500 index benchmark for year to date ending this year on August 18. So if we go to the next slide, this is a little bit longer term. The B of A Global Research did a study that's a little longer term, and based on data from ESG rating providers, in this graph they're saying that U.S. companies in the S&P 500 index that scored in the top fifth of ESG rankings outperformed those companies that scored in the bottom fifth of ESG rankings. B of A says the difference is at least 3 percentage points every year for the past 5 years. Their point is that ESG companies may be less vulnerable to systemic risk and more resilient to shocks. So to summarize, ESG factors may be considered as risks that prevent an organization from achieving its strategic goals. ESG factors may be important to stakeholders, and ESG factors may influence an organization's performance.
Thank you, Randy. That's really great information. I know all of our clients are oftentimes looking at ways to have a competitive advantage or to recruit talent, and so it makes a lot of sense that ESG components could be part of their consideration. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit more about the ESG reporting benefits, and Anne, who is an expert in this field, is going to give us a little bit more information about that.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Fran and Randy and PBO for inviting me to join you. Randy's already covered a number of topics related to the benefits, but I'll just briefly highlight some of those. From an internal perspective, there's a number of things that reporting on ESG and focusing on ESG can help with a company. For one, just looking at performance management, when you have to report on ESG, you have to start gathering probably more data than you might have gathered before. It can help with your sort of data systems and performance management systems. It helps you to identify efficiencies and cost savings in certain areas, particularly on the environmental side. That's there's return on investment a lot of our clients see from looking at issues like energy use and waste, for example. On the innovation side, paying attention to some consumer challenges like water scarcity, for example, or equitable access to healthcare. These are issues that have been coming up more and more recently for clients in different areas. If you're, as a company, looking at those sustainability challenges, it makes it more likely that you'll be able to identify new products or services for your customers or new markets, for example, to address those issues. Randy already talked a bit about risk management, so I won't go into that. And also, again, on the employee and recruitment side, we have some pretty compelling statistics about millennials and Gen Zers in terms of what they're looking at when they're considering where they want to work. About 83% of Gen Zers say that they consider a company's purpose when deciding where to work, and 75% of those will actually do research to investigate whether a company is actually walking the talk or talking, yeah, walking the talk. So it's becoming more and more important from a recruitment and retention standpoint as we get those next generations coming into the workforce. On the external benefits, again, Randy touched on already compliance issues, but there's also issues, just the benefits in terms of brand and reputation. I have clients who are now starting to ask questions when they're looking at net promoter scores and surveys around their customers' loyalty, and they're starting to put questions around whether corporate social responsibility and ESG issues matter, and they're finding that they do matter in terms of a customer's willingness to refer to friends or family a company's products or services. So we're starting to see more and more evidence around brand and reputation benefit. Certainly attracting capital. Randy showed those great slides that show that the sort of share values, you know, companies that have strong ESG outperforming others. And we know that asset managers such as Vanguard and BlackRock, which is the largest asset manager in the world, 1.7 trillion, I think, under management, they are more and more looking at these ESG issues. And so they're looking at the companies in their portfolios and asking questions around ESG, and so being able to answer those questions can help attract capital. And we'll talk a little bit more about the investor piece in a bit. But so, and as Fran already mentioned, the competitive advantage piece is one that companies are looking for. One of the statistics I have around that is that 50% of requests for proposals from U.S. hospitals ask questions of their vendors around CSR or ESG issues. So just to get in the door, to be competitive for these type of tenders, you're going to need to answer these questions. So there's a lot of benefits, both internal and external. We're going to jump to the alphabet soup of reporting frameworks. This area, if you're just beginning working on CSR or ESG, can be a little overwhelming, but there's some great tools and frameworks out there to help companies to kind of get a handle on where to start. And we don't have time to go into all these in detail today, but these are the most commonly used voluntary frameworks that are out there for companies to help determine what the most important topics are for them to focus on and how to do their reporting. About 90% of S&P 500 companies actually have sustainability reports. That was as of 2019. I'm sure the numbers are increased this year even more, close to 100%. About half of those companies actually use the top framework there, the Global Reporting Initiative, to report on their sustainability or ESG efforts. So you can see a little bit more information there about the focus of that particular framework and who the audiences are. And again, this is just a high-level summary of the frameworks out there. We're starting to see more and more interest in the SASB framework, which is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. I think about 25% of companies that report currently are using that framework, and I'm guessing there's going to be a lot more in the next year or two, as well as the one at the bottom, the TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Those two frameworks, SASB and TCFD, were both mentioned by Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, again, the largest asset manager in the world, in his annual letter to their investees and to the public, saying that they are going to start asking their investees to look at and report against these frameworks. So we're seeing in our business a lot more interest in those two, especially.
So, Anne, there's a question in terms of these frameworks. You know, companies that are privately held that are maybe 25 million and under, is there a better framework that would fit in that mold?
That's a great question. So most of these frameworks can be used for any size company. If you're privately held, I'd say the most common one is people using the GRI frameworks. I have privately held clients who use the GRI framework because it's sort of the broadest one. It's not specifically focused on investors, which some of the others are. So GRI is a great tool and sort of serves, it's sort of geared towards broader audiences than some of the others. The other framework that's not on here that we could mention is the B Corp certification, which tends to have more followers who are smaller and potentially privately held. But we don't have time to go into that could be a whole nother webinar we could do on B corporations and the certification there. But you could look that up, or I'd be happy to answer some questions about it at a later date.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I should mention that one thing that we do at Sustainability Next when we engage with a client is we help clients to figure out which framework or which combination of frameworks they might want to use to report against.
Oh,
so
excellent.
That's one of our services. And then on the next slide, we're just showing on the next slide a little bit more about investor activity in the ESG area. So these are, here's a list of a number of companies that are basically doing research on companies and rating them on their ESG performance. And they're doing it whether you know they're doing it or not. If you're a publicly traded company, they're looking at your website, at your annual report, at even webinars that you might put on, or other filings, media articles, and they're through that public information, they're actually giving, if you're publicly traded, they're giving your company a score. And so investors are looking at those scores to determine whether they want to invest in you based on your ESG, if that's something that they care about. So many of these rating questionnaires and surveys, sometimes they'll do a questionnaire, so you actually have the opportunity to answer questions about your ESG performance, but sometimes they're just picking up the data and you don't even know they're doing it. But sometimes they have very specific indicators for certain sectors, etc. So what we did, just to help, I'm going to preface this slide saying it's really important, if you're just starting this journey, for each company to figure out what the most important and what we're going to call material topics are for you based on your industry and your particular company. So we're going to talk more about that process in the coming slides, but we always get questions from clients about, well, maybe we don't have the resources right now to do a full-blown assessment of what the most important topics are. So can you just give us like the top 10? So we did research looking across the most commonly used investor surveys and questionnaires, and tried to map basically what are the most common topics, E, S, and G, that investors are asking for across the framework. So here's the top 10 list, including both environmental and social issues that appeared in all 6 of the questionnaires and surveys that we looked at. And some of these would just not be a surprise to you, looking at greenhouse gas emissions and energy use. These are core issues, either input issues or kind of output issues that companies create in terms of emissions. And then some basic health and safety, employee training and education, those kind of issues that often come up in these investor rankings. The next slide looks at the most common governance issues that come up, and sort of combination of governance and business ethics issues. So again, topics related to board structure and composition and diversity, conflicts of interest, anti-corruption issues. So those often are questions that are being asked by investors when they're looking at their publicly traded companies. I think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so now we're going to kind of check in with everybody and take another poll to get an understanding of, the primary reason that you or your company are interested in ESG. What is it? Your customers, your employee interests, retention and recruitment, your board and or leadership, your investors, or your personal. So check one of those boxes. I'll give you a few minutes. I did want to comment. I don't know if any of you saw, but the San Diego Business Journal had their nominations for the most successful board members in the community. And it was really interesting when you read those bios, because almost all of those board members have an ESG component to their initiatives. So, this is definitely a hot topic that we all need to be at least identifying, I think, what's important to us and our stakeholders. And so I think hopefully you guys are ready to show the poll results. This is really cool. I love this. So what's the primary reason that your company is interested in ESG? 75% board and or leadership, and 25% personal. So that's really interesting. So, apparently board is driving some of these initiatives, which is interesting. I think because of the environment we're in, that makes a lot of sense. So with that, we're going to hand it over to Anne to give us a little bit of where do we start with all of this. It's a lot, you got to start somewhere. So we'll hand it back over to Anne.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting to see the interest from the board and leadership. I'd say that's a really good sign, actually, that it's coming from that level. A lot of times, some clients, and it's happening less and less, but at the beginning when I first started doing this work, it was coming from elsewhere, and then we had to spend a lot of time. I had to spend a lot of time working with sort of maybe the internal champion to try to get the leadership and the board on board with this work. So, which can be a long process. So it's really great to see that there might be coming from that level now a little bit more. So essentially, again, this is very high level, but we've boiled down the process if you're just beginning your journey here to 8 steps, and we're going to just take a couple minutes to kind of walk through each step. This is something, if we are engaged with a client, that we work this process over maybe several months, but we're just going to take a couple minutes to explain each step of the process. And it's possible, even if you've already started your ESG journey, that you might be at, you might have already done the, one of step, but we can talk a little bit more detail about other pieces if you have questions about those. So these come based on our experience, these steps, and as well as some of the reporting frameworks and sort of their recommendations on the best way to start developing an ESG report. For example, the GRI framework has a guidebook that has steps in it that we've used to help create this as well. So the first step is really around building a team. And to start that, so we can go to the next slide, that team may consist of one very passionate person. Sometimes that's how it starts. One very passionate person might be personally passionate, as a number of you said you were personally passionate about this topic. Might be the person who in the company who's super passionate about getting the company to have more recycling bins, or to do more community volunteer work together. There's a number of ways that people come to this issue, but what it requires is having people who are passionate and really getting, if you can, a diverse group of people together. A lot of the teams that we're working with, they might start with the marketing or communications folks, or they might start with the HR unit based on if the company is in a really competitive, kind of workforce recruitment situation. It might be that they're looking at this from the employee standpoint. So we start working with them, but then they'll bring in, people from other areas, from legal, from finance, from operations and facilities to deal with the environmental issues. It might be product design folks who get involved in terms of thinking about innovation and packaging. Could be sales folks who, like I mentioned earlier, if they're having to respond more and more to RFPs or tenders that are asking about ESG issues. So the broader, more diverse group you can have, the more effective the ESG work will be and initiatives will be. And then just to add the bottom piece, the self-motivation, the reason why it's important people be passionate about this and sort of be self-motivated is that it can be a long journey. There's sometimes this work, at least at the beginning, falls outside of an employee's kind of official job description. So it's really important that they're willing and able to spend a little extra time potentially on this. And our work, hopefully over time, is to get the ESG work kind of embedded more in the company and including job descriptions. But it's just important to think about who you need at the table, who's persuasive, because a lot of the work also is kind of being an ambassador for embedding ESG and CSR into the company's business. So once you do that, get your team, it's important to start getting some information, like, kind of data on where you are. Maybe you already have some initiatives that could be considered ESG or CSR initiatives, but they're kind of spread out and diverse, and sort of it's great to kind of bring that information together. It might be that you start just simply looking at compliance issues. If there are areas where you're kind of having trouble in compliance, or you anticipate you might based on the growth of the company, those are good topics to start gathering information on. A really important piece of the work that we do is the peer benchmarking. And so a lot of times we'll work with a company and, kind of benchmark against, I don't know, anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 peers, looking within their sector, what are your peers and competitors doing or saying around environmental, social, and governance issues, or CSR issues? What topics are they talking about? What indicators are they using to measure their progress? And we'll present that back to our clients as a place to start. And also just looking internally, what data do you have available? Where do you have gaps in data, and that it might make sense to learn more about in terms of your performance on ESG. So that's kind of, there's kind of a research phase after you have your team. And this here is just an example on this slide of some benchmarking we did with it's sort of a sample version of a benchmark process we did with a life science company that was a client of ours, where we, basically looked at all the potential topics that that might be of concern to them. We looked at a couple of the reporting frameworks and the investor rating agencies to see which topics they thought were important for this particular sector. We benchmarked against a couple of competitors, and then we came up with a list of potential topics that the company could report on. And this just is one step in that process of identifying the most critical topics for you to be working on and reporting on. So that was just, we wanted to just show you an example there. Another piece of that process is identifying your potential impacts, not just looking at the frameworks and your peers, but actually kind of mapping out your business goals and sort of looking at the 3 areas of sustainability: economic, environment, and social, and trying to assess, are we going to have is there going to be a positive result from this business goal, or maybe a negative impact that we might want to figure out how to mitigate through our ESG and CSR initiatives. So this is just a little tool that you could use to again, help align your CSR ESG work with your business objectives. So through those pieces of research and assessing impact and maybe doing some benchmarking, you're going to start coming up with a list of potential topics. And the next part of the work is to really map out and identify your stakeholders. And Randy mentioned earlier stakeholders, the word stakeholders are here. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. These are people who either have an important impact, people or entities that have an important impact on your company's success, or that your company might actually have an impact on, an effect on. So you're going to look at all those folks. You're going to figure out, the next slide kind of shows you how to maybe think about prioritizing those folks. And then once you have, there are some that are going to be closer, kind of in the middle circle there, and they might be, for example, employees or investors. And sort of going out, you might be talking about competitors or peers who you might be influencing or have an impact on you, or regulators, for example. So you're going to try to map these folks, prioritize them, and then figure out ways to engage with them on the CSR and ESG topics that you've started, honing in on. You want, when you engage these folks, you want, there's a number of ways to do it. It could be focus groups or interviews, it could be social media surveys, but you're going to want to go to them with some, not so much open-ended questions, but like questions that already are starting to look at some of the topics that might be of concern.
So, Anne, we have another question here. So could a stakeholder potentially be a future stakeholder, a venture capital fund, or an M&A opportunity?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We often see, and when people are starting to do their stakeholder mapping, that future investors or potential investors, also potential employees, so not just your current employees, which is definitely a key stakeholder group, but potential employees. And sometimes those groups have overlapping interests, but sometimes they're slightly different. So it's important to look at both the current and potential. That's a great point. So again, we're just whipping through this whole scheme that can take months to do, but we just wanted you to have some very concrete takeaways so that at least you have a sense of like what the process would be to do this work. But once you've identified kind of a short list of topics, you've identified and prioritized your stakeholders, and now what you're really going to do is take all that research, take the feedback from your stakeholders, take your benchmarking information, take what you learned from the frameworks, and really try to come down to a shorter list of the most important topics that your company can take action on and report on, based on all those inputs that you've done. What is most material for your business? And I want to just say just a word about materiality. It's a topic that you're gonna, if you haven't already, hear thrown around a lot in this ESG realm. And in the ESG world, the official definition is, and I'm going to actually read it because it's a little bit long, but the official definition is material topics are those topics that have a direct or indirect impact on an organization's ability to create, preserve, or erode an economic, environmental, and social value for itself, the business itself, but also for its stakeholders and society at large. So that's kind of a broad definition of materiality. For those of you who are more familiar with and might work at or have worked at publicly traded companies, the SEC also has a much more narrow definition of materiality. It's really about financial material aspects. And there's a lot of debate and discussion right now between these two worlds of how these broader and more narrow definitions intersect. And again, we could do a whole webinar on that. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because sometimes it gets confusing for people who are just starting, that the materiality is used in a couple of different ways in different contexts. So we just wanted to show you an example of what is called a materiality matrix. This is Dell Technologies matrix, where they've done the process that we just talked about, and they've started to map it on an X and Y axis, where you see at the bottom the impact on the business, how important of a impact does the topic have on the business and business success, and then it's plotted against the impact to stakeholders. So the topics in the upper right-hand quadrant of the matrix show the ones that had a high level importance to both the business success as well as stakeholders. A lot of times those things align, but sometimes they don't. So this is one way that Dell is showing these are the issues that generally are important to them as a company. And they're probably going to address all of them at some point in some way, but they will allocate more of their resources to looking at and reporting on those topics in the upper right-hand quadrant. Any questions about that? Or
that's really cool. I can see over time a company, this is kind of like finance people do a SWOT. So
yes.
This is like the overlay of your SWOT analysis. You could actually do this as part of your strategic planning and incorporate it into. So very cool slide.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just say what you were mentioning over time just triggered me to think, yeah, so this is an evolving thing, right? So best practice is really for companies to do this every couple of years or so, because of course issues are always changing, and we're seeing that right now. I'm working with a lot of clients who are kind of re-looking at their materiality assessments that they did a year or maybe 18 months ago because of COVID-19, having, what kind of impact does that change their stakeholders' perception of what they should be working on, or did something else pop up in terms of higher importance to the business success because of the pandemic? So that's an example of why this is going to be evolving. It's not a static thing. It evolves over time, and you kind of consistently have to keep going back out to your stakeholders and assessing internally what topics are important, and they might be shifting and moving around on these matrices.
Makes sense. Makes sense a lot. So again, we're going to take another poll and see where everyone is in their process. So our next poll question is, Does your company know which ESG practices are material to your stakeholders, and have you set goals for these areas? And the options are in front of you. No clue. We have some idea, but don't have a final list. We know what topics are material, but have not set goals. And lastly, we've identified our material practices, set goals, and report. So I'll give you a few minutes on this one. It's really interesting because I think it's important for us to really connect with our stakeholders, because I think we have maybe an intuitive sense of what's important, but also taking a read on the pulse of the stakeholders to get a good sense of that. So now let's see what the answers to our poll was. So 40% no clue, 20% some idea, 20% material, and 20% we've identified our material practices. Wow, it's pretty even Steven on the bottom three. So very interesting. That's awesome that we've got some folks that are already identified their practices and set goals. So nextly, we're going to talk about those goals, and I'm going to send it back over to Anne.
Great, thanks. That is an interesting report back. So the next step in the process, once you would have your material topics, would be to try to identify what could be improved around those topics internally. What are best practices that you might be able to implement in some of those areas if you're not already doing that, and set some SMART goals. Some of you may have already seen this mnemonic, but SMART goals are ones that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So you're seeing nowadays, you're seeing a lot of companies, for example, setting goals around their renewable energy. For example, they want to have 50% of the energy that they use coming from renewable sources by the year 2025. Or you're seeing it a lot around emissions as well. It's gas emissions. They want to be, net zero emissions by 2035. So those are, specific, measurable, hopefully realistic for these companies, and sometimes maybe a stretch goal, and then have a specific time frame on them. So that's a part of the process to get a really robust ESG program or CSR program, as well as report. And so when you set the goals, you obviously need some indicators to measure against. And here again is where some of the frameworks can be very useful. Most of the frameworks we talked about at the beginning actually have recommended indicators or metrics that you could use for a particular topic. And so Randy showed you earlier the list of topics, and then this list kind of coincides with that, just showing more specifically how companies would measure issues around, for example, health and safety of their employees in the middle column. Okay, rates of injury, lost days at work. Those are very common indicators that companies are using, and it's really helpful for stakeholders to have companies be using these common metrics, because then they can compare apples to apples across an industry, for example. So again, the frameworks are great resources, and part of what we do at Sustainable Next also is to help you select the most relevant indicators based on the topics that you select and the data that you have available as well. That's an important piece of this. Finally, after you've got your goals, you're going to identify some of the opportunities. Where do you have the greatest opportunity to move the needle? Greatest opportunities to save money potentially, or to have impact, or in certain industries to provide leadership for your industry. I have a client who's like part of their kind of CSR DNA is really to be pulling their particular industry along. They want more companies in their sector to be more responsible, because they feel like it will help everyone. So they're a leader in their industry, but they're like part of their reporting kind of theory is that by doing so, they'll get others to do the same, which I think is a great idea. What are projects that could engage stakeholders, or that might be of most interest to customers or employees if you've been engaging with them? Really looking at the low-hanging fruit. So this is just an example of how a company, this is Sanofi, I believe, the 2019 report this is one company we found that sort of has a nice graphic about some of their goals and the progress against those goals. We have another example on the next slide that just shows a little bit more of an even more simple report that New Belgium Brewing is. That's actually one of the companies in the craft brewery sector that's been one of the leaders in sustainability and CSR reporting, and they've got some really nice simple graphics here around their some of their environmental goals and progress.
So, Anne, these are really beautiful materials. Who sees these? Is it in an internal document or is it external? How is this used?
It's used, I mean, again, it depends on the driver for your reporting. So if the company is really most interested in engaging its employees around this, it might be that these materials are more geared towards employees as an audience, and circulated either, in a print version, but most often on a website. I have one client who's actually taking pieces of their report and putting it into like almost bite-sized nuggets and putting it up on the monitors in the lunchroom so that their employees can see these little, bits of progress that the company's making in that way. Because it's a manufacturing company, and a lot of their employees probably wouldn't be going to the website or reading the full report, but they might get these bite-sized pieces from the monitor. So there's a lot of different ways to put the information out. As we said earlier, the investors are looking at websites, they're scraping websites to find this information. I'd say over half of the clients that I work with are, they're kind of preparing these reports with investors in mind, but they're also trying to make a design so that it's appealing to other audiences as well.
I think particularly in the craft brewing industry, this is a great slide because the industry's been so forward thinking. And so I have seen a little bit of the competitiveness in the industry amongst each other, which is kind of cool too, because then you can see the whole industry move to a different level. So
yeah, in their case, I would say the customers are a big push in the craft brewing industry. A lot of the impetus for this kind of work is coming from their customers who are asking questions about this.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is just kind of a summary slide based on our experience and just some best practices and tips. That it's really important to have this work be kind of embedded into the company culture, that there's strong buy-in. I sometimes, especially in the early days of CSR and ESG, we saw what we would call more like bolt-on type ESG initiatives where, it would be completely disconnected from the company's business goals or other goals. And now we're seeing more and more integration. So I think it's just important to try to figure out how to build ESG into the company culture and practices and business strategies. We definitely urge companies who are starting or even partway through this journey to conduct some sort of materiality analysis, and these can range from being like long 6-month, very expensive analyses to much shorter, more internal, maybe a little bit of external stakeholder engagement and more cost-effective. There are different ways to do that analysis, and again, it's part of the services that we offer. And to just, when you're communicating about this, to really try to communicate authentically and transparently. So there's all kinds of research and studies that are showing that audiences for this kind of information view companies much more positively when a company actually talks about some of the challenges that they're having. It doesn't just talk about, oh, here's all the great things we've done, but identifies areas where they're kind of struggling, but working, how they're addressing that struggle and working on it, because it's more authentic communication. So it's important to keep that in mind as a principle when you're thinking about communicating about these issues. So I think with that, I think we might have one more poll left, and then we have time for questions and answers.
Yep. And so this poll is really for us to understand, where are you all passionate and what would you like to learn a little bit more about as we roll out these programs to our clients, to our stakeholders. So please select which items are of most interest to you so that we can provide deeper dive into any of these topics. I'll give you a second. It's hard to choose. All right, let's see where we are. All right, wow, 100% climate change and energy. So, and 100% governance and ethics and resource management, which was water, waste, and recycling. Very interesting. Very, very interesting indeed. So we will develop some more information and a potential webinar based on where you all are interested in and be able to implement some more programs. And with that, there are some questions in the panel, and this one I think I'll hand over a question to Anne. It says, how has the pandemic affected the trends in ESG?
So before the pandemic, the biggest hot topic really has been around climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, there's all kinds of topics that are of interest to investors, but in particular, that topic had gained a lot of interest, and there's a lot of companies kind of scrambling to figure out how to develop scenarios around their climate scenarios. I think what we're seeing, the trend since the pandemic is just more of a trend towards the social issues, equity issues, diversity issues, health and safety issues, even training issues, to make sure that companies have good plans to keep their employees safe during the pandemic, or to keep their customers safe. So we're starting to see a lot more focus on that during the pandemic.
And then are you also seeing more interest because of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Definitely. The diversity, equity, and inclusion issues have been coming up a lot more this year in 2020. A lot of companies have been trying to address that for a while and been struggling with it, honestly. But we're seeing a lot more focus on that in this year because of Black Lives Matter.
And then here is another question. What are some easy and cost-effective ways to engage stakeholders to get their feedback?
Yeah, great question. We often try to work with clients to incorporate feedback in existing channels that they're already using to engage with their customers or their employees, for example. So if you already have, for example, a survey of your employees on a regular basis, maybe think about including 1 or 2 questions about CSR or ESG in that survey. So it's something that you're already paying for, and spending the staff resources to analyze. So that's a cost-effective way. The same with customer surveys. You've already probably got a customer survey going out on some sort of periodic or regular basis, and you can just add in a question, assuming that you're doing like an online survey or something like that, and add in some questions or a question about CSR and ESG and their perspectives on that. So I think that's one way that has been pretty easy and cost effective to use that. Just it aligns with what you're already doing.
Are you seeing surveys on like social media or places like that? I'm not real familiar.
Yeah, less so. I think so far those have been less effective. I do know some companies have tried to engage that way. I think it's worth trying to see what you get, but I wouldn't use it as my only, sort of my only avenue. Also, just there's focus groups you can do with employees if you have a natural all hands meeting or something, or there's opportunities often at companies where employees, or a retreat or something like that, where employees are getting together. You can think about doing a focus group to piggyback on something, a time where you're already bringing some employees together. So again, that's
this is an interesting question. It references back to having your identifying your group of people who are going to be your ambassadors or your, the people who implement this program. How do you go about identifying who those people are?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really a combination of people that you know who are passionate about this. So, I have some clients that just kind of put a general call out when they say we're going to form a CSR team, and they put an email out, and just let people who self-select who are interested, in the topic. There's other times when you need to be a little bit more strategic about it and just make sure that you have good representation from various departments. And so it's just, usually the person who's kind of like the champion, the initial champion, just kind of goes around and talks to different people in various departments or business units to find out, is anyone interested in this? And, I also find that it's important at the beginning to sort of have like a description for potential people that you're recruiting about what actually it's going to involve, like what's the role and how much of a time commitment. And that really helps to recruit people if you can tell them, this is going to take an hour a month from you, or 2 hours a month or something. And here's what we're going to ask of you to do. This is the kind of thing that we'll be asking you to do. I think that's an important piece in the recruitment process as well. But I think to the extent that you can, having people self-select, as long as you get good representation across business units or departments, is a good thing. And then you're just, legal and finance, I find are always important to include if you can, because in the end they have the say on.
That's true. Very true. And then finally, a couple more questions. Typically, how long does it take to get to a point where a company is ready to report on ESG?
That's a good question. It sort of always stumps me because I think it depends what level. I kind of, like I said earlier, I look at this as a journey, and it's sort of an iterative process, an evolving process. So you could, if you already have some things going on, you could put out a report just kind of collecting the information of what you're doing. It might not have strong metrics in it yet. It might not be all the topics that you should be reporting on based on your sector or whatever, but it would be a start. So, that can be as simple as just kind of taking a couple months and getting someone internally to collect some of the information and putting it out. If you're going to do a full-blown report and, really do the whole materiality process at some level, I would count on between 4 and 6 months.
Okay.
Probably.
That's good data point to have. And, a lot of us are finance people. We do have an HR team, and I can see how the cultural component would be really important with our HR consultants with what they're doing with their clients. But, I come from the finance side. So do you see ESG really being integrated into part of a strategic planning process, or do you see them as separate? Because I can see them as combined, but I'm not sure if that's appropriate.
I am starting to see that happen more and more where they're combined.
Okay.
It tends to be companies that have already been working on these issues for a while and have some experience with the ESG world, and sort of they're starting to integrate it more and more into their financial planning. And so it's happening. And so it's either that, or you see it in startups where actually part of their DNA is about social responsibility. Either their product itself has like some component of sustainability to it, or equity or something like that, but it's like part of their DNA is to be socially or environmentally responsible as a company. So you'll see it there too. And then there's a lot of companies in the middle where there's still sort of separate planning, like business planning and ESG planning processes. But I think we're going to start to see more and more those to get more integrated.
Okay. And lastly, this is really great information. How would we go about getting started in developing an ESG program?
Well, we gave you some of the steps here today, so hopefully those would be helpful. We are, of course, PBO and Sustainability Next are available to help you. We have an assessment process that we can do as a first step, where we just kind of go in and kind of look at some of the information, talk to you about what the reasons are for your interest in this, what some of the drivers are internally and externally. Look at some of the information and data that you have and make recommendations about how you could move forward on this ESG initiatives and reporting process. And then if you're interested in going further, we could certainly develop a proposal to, to work with you more. But that's one next step that you could take. So if you're interested in the assessment process, you can let us know.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. That's a really good place to start, is find out where you are and then move from there. So an assessment is a really nice way to put your toe in the water and get going. So with that, I wanted to thank Randy Barnes with the Business Advisory Services and Ann Tart with Sustainability Next. We're really excited about our partnership with Sustainability Next and how we can start to implement ESG programs for all of you that are interested. And if you have any questions or you want to get started, our contact information is here below. And we look forward to working with you on your environmental, social, and governance programs into the future. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.